The quiet afternoon of the suburban park suddenly turned into a nightmare when a tall man with a harsh face and a black jacket approached a playful dog resting near a bench. And without any warning, he violently kicked the animal, sending it rolling on the ground, whimpering in pain. The sound of the dog crying out pierced the air, causing people around to gasp in shock and confusion. No one could believe what they had just seen. The crowd froze, as if their bodies refused to react, while the cruel stranger stood with an arrogant grin on his face, as if hurting an innocent creature was a game to him. The breeze that once carried the warm scent of flowers now felt heavy and cold. Everyone held their breath, unsure of what would happen next. This was no ordinary moment. It was the beginning of a story where cruelty would be confronted by something far greater. Standing only a few steps away was the dog's owner, a man who at first glance seemed entirely ordinary. He wore a gray sweater and jeans, his hair slightly messy, as if he had just come from a casual walk. His eyes, however, told a different story. They were sharp, dark, and filled with an intensity that contrasted with his calm posture. He quietly stepped closer, his gaze moving from the trembling dog to the cruel stranger. Every movement of his hands and the slow, deep breaths he took suggested that he was not just a simple man. There was something hidden within him, something dangerous yet controlled. The people nearby started to notice the change in the atmosphere, as if the temperature had dropped slightly. It felt like they were witnessing a storm about to erupt, a confrontation that none of them could stop, but all of them wanted to see unfold. The dog whined softly, its small body shaking as it tried to crawl closer to its owner. The cruel stranger laughed low under his breath, clearly amused by the chaos he had caused. Around them, silence fell again, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the quiet rustle of leaves. The owner bent down gently, checking his dog, but when he lifted his head, his face had changed. There was no fear, no hesitation, only a chilling calm that made those watching feel both relieved and unsettled. What they could not know was that this man carried a secret, a truth so powerful that it would turn the cruel stranger's world upside down. He had endured battles much harder than this moment, and what would follow was something the stranger would never forget. Cruel stranger stepped closer, as if daring the owner to say something. His boots crunched against the gravel, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the tense silence of the park. A few bystanders whispered nervously, but no one moved to intervene. The man's grin widened as he pointed at the dog, mocking its weakness. His words dripped with contempt, saying things that made some people avert their eyes out of anger and discomfort. The dog whimpered again, as if sensing both danger and protection nearby. The air felt thick, almost electric, carrying the tension of an invisible storm. The stranger crossed his arms, waiting for a reaction, confident that no one would dare challenge him. Yet the owner's silence spoke volumes. It was not fear, but calculation. Every muscle in his body seemed coiled like a spring, ready to snap when the moment was right. This was not the reaction the cruel stranger expected, and for the first time, a flicker of confusion crossed his face. The crowd's unease grew as the owner slowly stood upright, his hands brushing the dust from his knees, and his eyes never leaving the cruel stranger. The look he gave was not of anger, but of measured intent, the kind that made even the boldest troublemakers hesitate. A young woman nearby whispered that someone should call the police, but no one reached for their phone. The owner's posture seemed to speak louder than any authority could. His calm presence contrasted so violently with the stranger's aggressive stance that people felt the tide might soon turn. The stranger scoffed, trying to reassert control by shouting insults, yet his voice cracked, ever so slightly, betraying an underlying fear. His confidence was beginning to waver, though he tried to mask it with louder words and exaggerated gestures. The owner stepped forward, just one step, but it was enough to make everyone sense that something irreversible was about to happen. The dog's breathing slowed, as if it too could feel the change in energy. The cruel stranger clenched his fists and narrowed his eyes, now uncertain of what he had started. The owner spoke for the first time, his voice low, steady, and chillingly calm. He asked why the stranger felt the need to harm something defenseless, a question that carried no anger, only truth. The words hit harder than any shout could. The stranger faltered, his mocking smirk replaced by an uncomfortable twitch. The crowd sensed that they were witnessing more than a confrontation. It was like a silent battle of power. The man who had once looked ordinary now radiated an aura of control and quiet authority. The stranger took a step back, involuntarily realizing for the first time that he might have chosen the wrong target. The silence that followed was deafening, but filled with anticipation of what would come next.
As the cruel stranger hesitated, the crowd began to sense that the owner was no ordinary man. His calm but intense gaze hinted at a past filled with trials and strength. He bent down to comfort the dog gently, running his hand over its trembling fur, before standing tall again. His presence was magnetic, commanding attention without the need for words. There was something about the way he carried himself, shoulders squared and jaw set, that spoke of discipline and hidden power. The cruel stranger shifted uncomfortably, his earlier arrogance starting to crack. The owner's eyes told a story of someone who had faced danger and never backed down. Yet this time, he remained perfectly controlled. A young man in the crowd whispered that the owner looked like someone who had seen battle, maybe a soldier or a leader. Whatever his story was, it was clear that the cruel stranger had underestimated him. Memories flickered in the owner's mind, but he kept his face unreadable. He remembered his days in the military, the countless times he had stood up to injustice and fought to protect the innocent. The dog by his side was more than just a pet. It was his loyal companion, rescued from a life of neglect and pain. He had promised that no one would hurt it again, and this vow burned in his chest as he looked at the cruel stranger. The park seemed to fall silent, as if waiting for his next move. People could feel the weight of his past, though none of them knew its details. The owner's life had been shaped by hardship, but also by an unwavering sense of justice. And today, that justice was about to surface with a force the stranger could never anticipate. The cruel stranger tried to laugh, but it sounded hollow, as though he sensed the shift in power. He looked around for support, but found only cold stares from the crowd, who now stood firmly behind the owner. The man's mysterious aura was undeniable, making everyone curious yet cautious. His hand rested on the dog's back as if drawing strength from its presence. The stranger mumbled something under his breath, but his words carried no weight anymore. The owner finally spoke again, this time louder, his tone steady and unyielding. He said that hurting a defenseless creature revealed the true weakness of a man, not his strength. The statement landed like a hammer, silencing even the faint whispers of the crowd. The cruel stranger flinched, realizing that his actions had marked him not as powerful, but as pitiful. The stranger's face hardened, but his eyes betrayed uncertainty. He stepped closer, trying to reclaim control of the moment. His voice rose as he threw insults toward the owner, calling him weak for defending a mere animal. But every word felt forced, as if he was desperately trying to hold onto a crumbling facade. The crowd shifted uneasily, sensing the tension escalate. The owner stood still, his body relaxed, but his stance radiated strength. He did not need to raise his voice or threaten anyone. His silence alone carried a warning. The dog whined softly, pressing closer to his leg as if knowing something big was about to happen. Then, without warning, the stranger reached out as if to push the owner aside. But the man's hand moved with calm precision, catching the stranger's wrist. The crowd gasped. The owner's grip was firm, yet not violent. It was a clear message of authority and control. The stranger jerked his arm free, looking stunned by the effortless move. The crowd murmured in astonishment, whispering about how quick and confident the owner was. It was as if he had done this many times before. The stranger's bravado faltered as he glanced around, noticing the sharp glares of people who no longer feared him. Some even raised their phones to record the incident, adding pressure to his crumbling arrogance. The owner simply looked at him and said that no cruelty would go unchallenged today. His words were measured but heavy, like a judge delivering a verdict. The stranger took a step back, but his pride refused to let him retreat completely. He clenched his fists, breathing heavily, yet deep down, he knew he was losing control of the situation. The owner's calm demeanor was more intimidating than any shout or threat could ever be. The park felt like a courtroom, with the crowd acting as silent witnesses.
The stranger's anger burned, but it was mixed with fear. His eyes darted between the owner and the spectators, realizing his image of dominance had shattered. Meanwhile, the owner bent down to check the dog's injury once more, then slowly stood up, his presence commanding absolute attention. With a firm voice, he told the stranger that this was his final chance to walk away without consequences. The man's tone carried the weight of someone who had nothing to prove, but everything to defend. The stranger hesitated, his breathing uneven, his arrogance breaking like glass. A woman whispered that the owner looked like he had military training, and the idea seemed to ripple through the crowd. Everyone knew now that this confrontation was far from over, and something bigger was coming. The tension in the park grew thicker as the stranger glared at the owner, trying to mask the unease in his eyes. A hush fell over the crowd as the man in the gray sweater knelt beside his dog, whispering soothing words. His gentle actions contrasted sharply with the cruelty that had just unfolded. Around them, people started recording videos, whispering that something felt different about this man, not just his calmness, but the aura of quiet power that surrounded him. The stranger seemed to sense it too, because for the first time, he took a careful step back, as if reassessing the situation. The owner stood again, and this time there was a subtle change in his expression. His gaze was sharp, focused, and unshaken, as though he was no longer just protecting his dog, but preparing to reveal something that could shift the entire confrontation. Whispers rippled through the crowd as they speculated about who the dog's owner might be. Some said he looked like a retired soldier, while others believed he was someone with influence and authority. The man ignored the chatter instead, focusing on the stranger with a piercing stare. He asked one simple question: why hurt something innocent? The question was delivered with a calm voice, but it cut deep. The kind of question that makes everyone stop and think. Even the cruel stranger had no ready answer. Instead, he shifted his weight uneasily, his jaw tightening, as though realizing he might have made a serious mistake. The man's tone carried a gravity that went beyond anger. It was the tone of someone who had seen true cruelty and would not let it go unpunished. His presence alone was enough to make the stranger falter. The dog's owner finally stepped forward into the open circle of space that the crowd had instinctively formed. His posture was upright, his face unwavering, but his eyes burned with an intensity that demanded respect. He looked at the stranger and said that people reveal their true nature when no one is watching, but today the world was watching every move. The words sent a shiver through those nearby, reminding them that cameras were rolling and the truth would be seen by many. The stranger looked uneasy, glancing around at the phones pointed his way. He suddenly seemed smaller, less threatening. His bravado was fading, replaced by frustration and fear. The owner did not have to raise his voice. The simple power of his presence and the weight of his words were enough to tilt the balance of the entire scene. The tension had reached its peak when a middle-aged man in the crowd suddenly whispered a name loud enough for others to hear. The dog's owner turned slightly, and a few people gasped in recognition. They started murmuring that they had seen him on television or in the news, but no one could place exactly where. The cruel stranger's brow furrowed confusion, mixing with irritation as he noticed the shift in the crowd's energy. The man in the gray sweater bent down and stroked his dog's fur once more before calmly standing to face everyone. His steady eyes scanned the faces around him, and when he finally spoke, the words carried a surprising weight. He introduced himself not with pride but with quiet authority, revealing that he was a former decorated officer who had spent years protecting lives and serving justice. The crowd froze, hanging on to every word. The revelation spread like wildfire. People whispered in shock as they learned that the man who had just been insulted was not a random dog owner, but someone who had risked everything to safeguard others. His past was marked with acts of bravery and leadership known by many in the military community. The cruel stranger's smirk vanished, replaced by a pale expression of disbelief. He stepped back, glancing nervously at the cameras now recording his every movement. The owner's voice remained calm but sharp. He told the stranger that cruelty towards the weak reflects the true character of a person, not their strength. His words struck harder because they came from someone who had lived through real battles, not petty displays of ego. The stranger's confidence crumbled in front of everyone. The dog wagged its tail slightly as if sensing the shift in energy. The crowd, which had once been hesitant, now stood united behind the owner. Some people clapped softly, others simply watched in silence with deep respect. The cruel stranger was no longer the center of attention. The owner looked at him one last time and calmly warned that if he ever hurt another animal again, he would face consequences far worse than public shame. It was not a threat, but a promise spoken with the certainty of a man who had seen justice delivered in countless forms. The stranger muttered something unintelligible before turning away, his bravado completely shattered. The park felt transformed, as if everyone present had just witnessed a powerful moment of truth and honor.
After the stranger turned away, the crowd erupted into murmurs of admiration for the dog's owner. Some people stepped forward to thank him, while others quietly recorded their thoughts about what had just happened. The man remained humble, simply nodding and returning his focus to the trembling dog beside him. He gently checked its paws and fur, as if nothing else in the world mattered at that moment. His calmness spoke volumes far louder than any grand speech could. The cruel stranger paused a few steps away, torn between fleeing and saving face. But the owner's voice called out again, firm and resolute. He reminded the crowd that standing up for the helpless is not a sign of weakness, but true strength. His words ignited a sense of responsibility among the onlookers, making them realize they too could choose courage when facing injustice. A young woman stepped closer, tears in her eyes as she explained how the incident had reminded her of her own dog that had once been mistreated. The man's quiet dignity and strength gave her hope. She asked for his name, and though he introduced himself simply, the crowd reacted as if he had given them a gift. He spoke briefly about compassion, respect, and the power of kindness in everyday life. His words were not rehearsed, but came from lived experience, and that sincerity resonated deeply. The cruel stranger stood frozen, listening to every word, unable to find a single retort. The phones pointed at the scene were now recording a moment of unity, a collective sense of justice that seemed to wash over everyone present. The atmosphere shifted from tension to inspiration. The man shared a small story about how he had rescued the dog years ago from an abusive home and promised it a safe life forever protected. That promise, he said, was why he would never allow anyone to harm it again. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of a vow forged through loyalty and love. The crowd applauded, some even shedding tears, while the cruel stranger shrank further into the background. A few people approached to offer the man water and treats for the dog, while others spoke softly about how the world needed more people like him. The moment had transcended a simple confrontation. It had become a living lesson about courage and humanity. The cruel stranger finally walked away, head down and humiliated. The crowd's attention shifted entirely to the man and his dog. A few local reporters who happened to be nearby approached him, eager to capture his story, but he politely declined, saying that true kindness does not need recognition. His calm refusal made people admire him even more. It was not about fame or showing off, but about doing what is right. The dog wagged its tail again and nuzzled his leg, as if thanking him for his unwavering loyalty. The air in the park felt lighter, now the tension replaced with a warm sense of respect and admiration. Everyone present knew they had witnessed something unforgettable, something that reminded them that compassion is a powerful weapon against cruelty. As people began to disperse, they continued whispering about how remarkable the man was. A mother who had been watching with her child leaned down and explained to her son that this was what true courage looked like. The boy nodded, eyes wide, with inspiration. The man crouched to give the dog some water while smiling faintly at the people still thanking him. The stranger's departure felt like the clearing of a storm, leaving behind calm skies. The crowd exchanged glances, some recording final videos or taking photos, not for entertainment, but to share a story that could inspire many others. Everyone knew that this single act of courage could ripple far beyond this park.
changing the way people think about empathy and justice. The man took one last look at the people around him and said softly that the world only becomes better when we protect those who cannot protect themselves. His words were carried by the wind, lingering in the hearts of everyone present. A teenager shouted thank you, while another person promised to adopt a dog from the local shelter. The owner simply smiled and walked away, his faithful companion trotting beside him. The crowd watched silently, understanding that they had just witnessed a rare moment of true humanity, a moment of courage, compassion, and justice, worth remembering forever. If you were inspired by this story and want more emotional justice stories like this, remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Hidden Justice now.